Hey YouTube, I'm here at the beach, and I thought, what a wonderful idea to speak about religion while I'm here. I grew up in a Hasidic Orthodox community, the community of Chabad, and when I originally dropped these practices and sort of left this community at 19 or 20, I originally thought it would just sort of be, that would be it, and on to whatever's next for me. And over the past, year or two, I've become to, it's become to began to sort of bubble up in my consciousness. Different parts of, my childhood and the dynamics within this community, which contribute to a lack of well-being and a lack of acceptance of other people later in life. The first thing I'd like to point out is that within Judaism, especially fundamentalist Judaism, as I consider my own upbringing in this Hasidic community, that there's so much objectification of children, and then on to objectification of other people, objectification of people not in the community, objectification of people in the community. And that looks like not seeing a child as a being that has, needs that you have to become curious about, but rather seeing a child as this thing to be trained. And it's not to say that there aren't, parents who are curious about their children, but I think within this community, it's very difficult to see an entire child because you are given this sort of lateral task, or task that you have to complete simultaneously while you're bringing up your child, is also converting them to this religion or training them in this religion. The belief within the Hasidic community is that because they're born Hasidic or Jewish, that they are Jewish. But in truth, what happens, it's like any other group. You just have a group and you're trained in the culture of this group from an early age. And I'd say that, let's say a Jewish child was raised by, just a family in another, out anywhere else, they would have the genetics of this lineage, the epigenetics of this lineage, the good and the bad, but they wouldn't have, the Judaism, which is why I frame it as it's a training. And it is objectifying specifically because of how extreme this training is. For example, boys and girls are completely separated. And there isn't really a sexual education. There's just sort of this expectation that you'll just not be around girls because you're not going to school with them. And this doesn't directly lead to sexual issues, but it does lead to sort of objectifying women. Because you just don't know. You just sort of, from your sisters, from your cousins. But generally you just don't know that women are sort of the same as you. You're trained not to. You're trained to think that they're different. And mind you, a week's worth of interaction with someone in a female body would break down all of this training. But that obviously doesn't happen because you're separate from them. And on top of that, there is sort of there's a not so subtle training within specifically this Hasidic community in the Hasidic texts, which are highly, highly revered. I'd say even higher than the Bible, the Old Testament, the Torah. These Hasidic texts are so revered in this lineage. And in these texts themselves, it says all sorts of like dehumanizing things about women. And honestly, people who are also just not Jewish, like for example in the Tanya, maybe this is not so relevant, but it just like, it makes me raise an eyebrow because like in the Tanya, it talks about these spiritual planes, which I think people experience when they have metaphysical experiences, either through psychedelics or through meditation or through spontaneous spiritual experiences. But this book sets out explains it, these different planes. And one of the things it says is that, and maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but it says Jewish souls come from a different plane, comes from a higher plane than non-Jewish souls. And teaching that to, a young teenager or a child, I believe it's at the end of the first chapter of the Tanya, but teaching this to a child is like ridiculous. Even if you want to just say, oh, this is just in a book, this is like, why are you teaching this like kind of hateful stuff? And then maybe you can get more philosophically curious about like, what the hell was this guy going through that he like wrote this down? What did he see? Or I think very often with spiritual experiences, especially in the beginning, we tend to project a lot of our unresolved traumas onto those spiritual experiences. They become really a psychological experience. After the initial like spiritual experience, then there's like this psychological undoing and all of your kind of stuff comes up. Yeah, so this is the first part, like this objectification. And then, when I kind of came out, and this, I've been in more than one sort of Orthodox community. And this is, while it's not the same in every community, it's definitely rampant. Like in the modern Orthodox community, just as much as the Hasidic community, there's this objectification. Not always, not in every community, but I've seen it in the more, extreme parts of this community, that there's a lot of objectification. And this objectification leads to, I think it fosters an environment where sexual assault happens. Not necessarily, well, it's definitely true that violent sexual assault definitely happens, but it also creates an environment where people just don't know about sex. And, because of that discomfort, I'd say probably a lot more people are drinking to have sex to sort of get through this experience, because it's weird. Your whole life you're taught sex is bad, sex before marriage is bad. So if you leave this community, most likely you're going to be drinking to have sex, at least in the beginning. And I could be wrong, but that leads to a lack of attunement between two people, and that leads to boundaries being crossed, me not being able to say yes or no about myself, and also me not being able to see the yes or no in the other person. And I do believe in verbal communication is obviously the clearest, the easiest, the best, but even when someone's not able to say yes or no, if you're attuned and not living in ideologies, but living in your body, you can just see it in the other person, and who wants to engage in such an intimate activity with someone that's not really there? It objectifies yourself, myself, and it objectifies the other person. So these are some thoughts. There's some other stuff. But this is kind of my little soliloquy for now. See you on the next one.